Investing insights with Right Property Group, exploring trends in real estate and helping property investors gain financial security.
Hey there everybody, Steve Waters and Victor Kumar back again for another Investing Insights recorded film version of the podcast, Vic.
It is.
I just never know where I get mixed up on what we're doing. I know that sounds really amateurish and perhaps it is, but whether it's filmed, whether it's not, whether it's Facebook Live, whether it's one of the other podcasts, but I digress.
But here we are. With information about property, using our experience in the various markets we've seen, and certainly taking into account the immense changes that are happening in the property front at the moment.
Well, do you know, it's when you think about it though, from the beginning of this decade, which is quite apt because we do the designer decade thing as well, but from the beginning of this decade, there has not been any norm.
No. Every single year there's been some level of change.
Every month there's been some level of change.
That's right.
And rather than sort of regurgitate all that, because we all know what it is, but today, though, the changes of the most recent, I guess, couple of months, weeks, is all about interest rates.
That's it. It's a new cycle. Rates. The finance cycle certainly has changed, hasn't it?
It is. And now we've been talking about that for quite some time, but we'll get to that in the minute, I guess. And I guess as we speak, we'll talk about how it's affected different parts of the market as well. More importantly, I guess what it's doing to the consumer mindset, because that flows on down to price.
Yep.
And maybe some of the propaganda pieces
around it,
around it to shape the consumer confidence levels. But it has been interesting. Like, we are definitely still feeling the effects, and will for some time, of COVID, where we are seeing the effects of the Ukraine war throughout the world and obviously locally here in Australia. And that's not changing anytime soon, as much as we'd love it to, just from a human aspect. The economic aspect is also very, very bad. And you can't compare the two, so don't take me out of context there. But what we're seeing is a worldwide ecosystem that has been flipped on its head, that started with COVID. When was that, 19, 20?
20? Yeah, tail end of 19.
Yeah, so 19/20 all the way through to now. And then even locally, federal election, and the time that this podcast comes out, the election has happened, and there has been a result, and we'll talk about that in the next podcast, I guess. So I've just given it away. We're actually doing this 5 days beforehand.
That's it.
Before the secret's out. But today, really, Vic, is all about interest rates. It's all about the new environment that we are going into. And it is the question on everybody's mind is, what will the market do? What should I do? And that's being propelled without any shadow of a doubt by the media and the narrative that's coming via them. And it's I find it fascinating to see, depending on who the media supplier is or who what the platform is, really does have a difference in what the message is.
And you find that, and this is something that we've said all along, is that with the news cycle and with journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, if the topic is more doom and gloom, it's likely to get a greater traction as opposed to the feel-good stories in that sense, right? So when you're talking about property, particularly with the way the economists are making their predictions, now more than ever, the naysayers of hang on, there'll be a 40% dip in property prices and all that, they're coming out in the dozens at the moment. And this is something that with us investing through many decades, we have seen this time and time again. As cycles change, you have one side of the coin, whether it's going to drop by 40%, or the other side, it's going to go up by 40%. So jump in now. And this is where I guess we need to talk about, should we wait it out, or should we take assertive action, or should we take any action at all?
Yeah, sometimes sitting on your hands and doing nothing is the best thing to do. But we'll dissect each of those questions, I guess, as the podcast goes on. But what amazes me with journalism is that there's never just a normal piece. I guess It lurches from it's going to be it's a boom or it's a bust. There's never just normalness because I guess doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't sell advertising space. So there has to be a slant to it. The thing you just mentioned something there about some of the media saying, well, it's going to be a 40% drop in the value of the asset. Now, to be fair, there probably will be those small items, those small properties, individual properties, which may have a 40% reduction from the original sale price or the last sale price to the next one.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because it was probably oversold to begin with. And we've seen this through the multiple cycles. But what will happen is the journalists, or the media, I should say, will jump on those small random examples and use that as a general consensus of the whole market. And because there will be, without fail, there'll be properties that have a massive price discrepancy over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on what data they hang their hat on, right?
Yeah, good point.
Whether it is the actual price drop, whether it is the site visits, or whether it is the turnover rate in that area. So that's what determines if they latch their hand on say the number of visits, and let's say it's down by 40%, right? All of a sudden, property is down by 40%. That's just the headline. So we need to read the whole article in its entirety and correlate it to how it matches into the bigger set of data, which is the national data, or if you bring it down, suburb, state-wise, and so forth, because that will determine whether you run scared like Chicken Little, or whether you actually look past all of that and say, hang on, what's the bigger picture here?
It's a good point, because when we look at the history, and we, fortunately or unfortunately because of our age, have
You're
seen...
Speaking for yourself, are you?
I'm the youngest in the room, Vic. We've been fortunate enough to go through multiple cycles, and that's from a national level and even a more localised level. And that's a point too, nationally and localised. Different trigger points, same narrative from time to time, but also somewhat same results.
Yeah.
But those time frames between the results are becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. And we've talked about that on probably a dozen different podcasts, Facebook Lives, where technology has definitely reshaped the peak to trough periods of time. And perhaps today we'll collectively bring it all together, I guess, because now the rubber hits the road.
Yes.
All of those components that we've been talking about for many, many years now are starting to come together, both in a negative and a positive scenario. But just coming back to the technology piece, just think how long ago it was that the say units in, I'll just take parts of Sydney, and we've mentioned this before, but I'll do it again, parts of Sydney where you couldn't give them away from a rentable perspective, and you couldn't sell them because the commercial filter that's tied to residential real estate, you couldn't give them away. We're talking 18 months ago. Fast forward to today, you can't get one. You can't rent one because there is none available. And as we've mentioned before, people are offering $100, $150 a week above the asking price for the rent on the inspection, and prepaying 6 to 12 months in advance just to secure the property. Now, that's the accommodation crisis that we've had. But my point is, in this mere 18 months, things have flipped.
It's just turned on its head.
On its head. If we go back in history, though, and go back to the early 2000s, that would have taken a long time to do that full revolution, I guess, from being an oversupplied scenario to an undersupplied scenario. But thanks to technology and obviously the environment that we're in with COVID and how quickly that happened, and potentially how quick we've got over it, some would say, that the effects of that have been instant, both in the beginning and at the end. Then throw a Ukraine war in and all the dynamics that has and the flow-on effect, and we are where we are today, which is interest rates.
That's it.
That's what everyone wants to know about. What are the interest rates going to do to my home value or my property's value? Should I be buying now? Should I be waiting? Should I be trying to time the market? So on. So let's get into that, because it is the $1 trillion question that everybody wants.
Literally.
And the answer is depends.
Depends. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next fortnight. Yeah. But essentially, everybody does have their own unique circumstances. Like, that's the truth, and we always talk about it as everybody does. But those investors that, and I'll phrase them up as sophisticated, so maybe it's sophisticated in the way they think, or the way they act, or the way that they invest.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they're in a very, very unique but good position to control the asset moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, that doesn't mean across the country, because the markets now will get back to potentially some shape of normality in terms of their growth patterns. So rather than the vertical growth that we've all experienced collectively across the country, where usually that doesn't happen. Usually one's going up, one's going sideways, one might be giving a bit back, as we've talked about before. But potentially we're coming back to a more normalised period, except with the filter that we have an accommodation crisis like we have never seen before. Never. And I know people want to compare it to the GFC and some of those same metrics around, say, rental increases. But I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, and we've been doing this now 22 years, 23 years or thereabouts. I've never seen the characteristics of a market in terms of accommodation that we have today.
No.
Never.
It is next level, and it's going to get worse still because you've got different facets coming in together. Like you said, it's the perfect storm building up, and depending on how watertight your ship is, it will determine whether you'll be able to weather this storm. So you've got the interest rate obviously going up, and it is in a upward cycle now. So we'll have a couple of interest rate rises. You've got the accommodation crisis, where the act of building a property is taking twice as long, and perhaps 30% more, if not more, in terms of the cost. Then you'll have the tightening of credit, because the banks will say, okay, I'm not sure where the market's heading right now, so I'm going to dial back my loan to value ratio. I'm going to take a closer, harder look at how I qualify you for the loan. Whilst I still want the business, I want safe business, just in case the market tanks.
It's all about risk.
Yeah, that's all about risk. And on top of all of that, you've got the migration factor coming in now, right? So the borders are now open. The expats are coming back in droves. You've also got your migrants now starting to filter back in, and certainly the student population and the hospitality population are starting to come back in as Australia gets back into normality, or some level of normality, right? We're still not quite out of it yet. But when you put all of these things together, it's the perfect mix. When you throw in information, the ease of transfer of information, it's the perfect mix for a runaway market, but not the runaway market we saw in 2020-21, but a runaway market in terms of getting your foundations in place, being able to get onto the baseline as an upswing. On one caveat, now we talked about interest rate, we're talking about whether we should hold off or not. It's not whether the bank says to you that yes, you can borrow $1 million. I think it now drills back to your household. Can you afford $1 million based on your circumstances as to what's going to happen in your life right now, work-wise, relationship-wise, debt-wise, and what's going to happen in 18 months, 2 years? What you're finding is that the interest rates with their higher dollar value doesn't last that long anymore. It's no longer that 7 or 10 year cycles of interest rates. It's much shorter, like everything.
And that's the point. And you actually stole my thunder again. It's because that's one of the points I was going to make. Like, once these bottlenecks of supply open up, whether that be tomorrow, next week, next year, 2 years' time, we'll start to see potentially those rates come down as an effect, as an after effect, along with other components, clearly. So the rate cycle, if you will be very, very different than what it has been over the last decade or 2 decades, those longer lengths, yeah? Now, am I saying that rates are not going to continue to go up? No, I'm not saying that, because they will. How far? Nobody knows, because the government and the bankers and the powers to be have a juggling act. As we've mentioned before, they're in a real checkmate position at the moment. And I'd love to see the conversations in the back rooms and the arguments that happen, should we, how far, how fast, etc., that goes along the rates and the economy. So that rate cycle will be very different than what we've experienced over the last decade or so. But you mentioned the construction costs, and this is something that we've talked about, I'm going to call it for probably half of last year, even before that, but all the different components, where we did mention that there was an undersupply of accommodation. We started talking about that in 2017, 18, saying watch the pipeline because it's going to happen. And we were laughed at physically by a lot of people, journalists in fact. I was nearly said their name, but I won't. But you know who you are. In combination with the lockdown borders, what happens when they open? With construction costs, what happens when the interest rates start to go? Because that was just an obvious thing. Somewhere in the future, the rates were going to go up, especially when you print money at the speed of which the worldwide economies were doing. What's going to happen in terms of the lending cycle? When we get to that inflection point, hashtag right now, what is going to be the accommodation piece? But I wanted to make a couple of points around the construction costs. We all know that
It's up.
it's up. Trying to get a tradie, you can't. And good on your tradies. Charge whatever you need to. You can't get materials. You can't get a timeline. You can't get it's very hard to get a fixed price contract now. So there was an article that came out the other day from the Master Builders Association, I think it was, of New South Wales, where they put down some building components and what they've done in the last 12 months in terms of the increases. So just to name a few, reinforcing steel. These are all building components too to the listener. Reinforcing steel up 43.5%, steel beams 40%, structural timbers 40%, plastic pipes and fittings 30%, electrical cable and conduits 30%, terracotta tiles 21%, metal roofing 20%, insulation 14%, and the list goes on and on and on, right? So that's in the last 12 months. But underneath that, and I'll put that, we'll put that article up on the socials in the next couple of days. But what was interesting is after that article, a gazillion trades have commented on it and said, we don't know where you're getting your numbers from, but in a lot of those cases, try doubling it in terms of the price increases to these components. Right now, that's obviously stating the obvious. That's a flow on through to the construction costs. The Master Builders Association said, well, maybe builders, it's time for you to start doing building contracts as cost plus. So what that means is cost of materials plus a margin through to the consumer. But as all the builders have said, it's a great concept, but it won't work because the banks won't fund that.
Because there's no surety in how much they're lending, isn't it?
Correct. So checkmate 37, like in terms of the construction industry. And that's why we are starting to see a lot of insolvency within the building industry. And we mentioned that over 12, 18 months ago, saying, unfortunately, this is going to be a real thing. But as a major component of building, to provide the accommodation, in combination with the end of the lending finance ecosystem or environment, so we're coming to the tail end of that, i.e. lending is going to be harder to get due to rates, the metrics, LVR positions, etc. With borders opening, with already an undersupplied scenario, where does it leave rents? Up. Now, I'm being very general.
Only way.
I'm being very, very general. Most areas will be up. Worst case, some areas will be static level. Yep. So as an investor, and cash flow is king, that's our major revenue stream being the rent, and rates are going up. I did the numbers as a side point on a client's property the other day about that, and the rent has gone up $130 a week over the last 14 months, I think it is. With the increased interest rate, and we doubled it just for the very short term, he's still in a better position than what he was pre-COVID. Yeah. With the higher interest rates and the lower rent. Now, I'm not saying that's everybody's going to be in that same boat, but in his particular position, I guess it was comforting because he knows that the position hasn't changed as to where he was happy.
The dollar figure may have changed.
The dollar figure's changed, but the repayments have clearly changed, but the rent has gone up. Now, if you extrapolate that over 2 properties, several properties, 100 properties, obviously the position gets a little bit more complicated and it's a little, perhaps potentially a little bit more real because we're playing with bigger numbers. Yeah. But if we drill it down to it further, the locality of the property will dictate the stress to the owner.
Absolutely.
And that's a key point. So there are some areas throughout the country, predominantly maybe parts of Sydney, maybe parts of Melbourne, especially on that higher end of the mortgage belts, perhaps is a way to put it, where there could be a little, I'm not going to say struggle, yeah, and I'm being general because obviously some people will, but there'll be a paper loss, which could, and what I mean by that is the value of the property might be different than what they purchased it was at, say, Christmas. And that wealth effect piece subconsciously could, if you let it, play havoc to the general sort of public. There'll be other people, and this is where I go back to the sophisticated thinkers, they'll say, well, it's a paper trade. Yeah, we know that it's cyclical. We know that time in the market is very, very important, and we know that over time we'll be in a much wealthier position on paper. It's really about the now. Can I afford it? How can I enhance my position? Should I sell? Should I keep? Should I buy? And these are the questions that we get on a
daily basis.
On a daily basis.
Yeah. So if we look at a couple of points that you made, right? So you mentioned that finance will get harder, and so it sort of seems like counterintuitive because obviously with the way the market is, you assume that the bank's really keen to lend money because property's at a premium at the moment. But it's not necessarily the changes within the lending criteria itself. It's the assessment rate. So as your interest rate goes up, your assessment rate goes up as well. So where previously you are able to qualify for $1 million as an example, with the current interest rate increase, you may only qualify for $950 or $900. Nothing else has changed, right? So then when you look at your portfolio of today, it is really paramount that we keep abreast of the market and ethically raise our rents, because what it does allow for is the spread to remain the same. So your interest rates have gone up, your rents after a little while have caught up, and therefore the even though you're paying a higher interest rate, the amount of money that you need to chip in from your own pocket remains relatively the same. And further to that, if you look at it from a viewpoint of being proactive with your loans, your mortgages, which is the biggest cost in home ownership and investing, you need to look at it from a viewpoint of, okay, how can I minimize the interest payable? Does it mean that you need to refinance? Does it mean that you need to restructure your debt? Can we revert from a principal and interest to interest only? Because one of the big waves of perhaps a hurt that is coming on is people going off their fixed rates. They are on fixed rates on interest only, especially when talking about investors, and they're reverting to your standard variable rate. Now, heads up, standard variable rate, unless you actually talk to the bank, automatically reverts to 4% plus principal and interest. Okay, so you don't get your normal 3% as a normal. You need to actually have that conversation with the bank in most cases. So it's reverting from, say, as an example, 2.9 interest only to all of a sudden 4.5 principal and interest. Not only have you doubled your interest rate, you've now thrown in a principal repayment component into that as well. And along with that, with a few more interest rate rises coming along, that'll certainly put pressure on the household budget. And when that happens, throw in all of the media headlines about property dropping by 40% or a doom in a property bust coming our way, that's certainly going to play with people's thought process in terms of whether do I keep, do I add more to the portfolio, do I hold, or what do I do? And this is where, for the unprepared, that's where they make the mistakes of perhaps offloading too early, or equally importantly, offloading too late.
It's a good point, because if we take the offloading too early scenario, go back to the GFC. Now, the point I'm about to make is also relevant to today. And if I go back to the GFC, those that were under duress and had to sell their property
for cash flow reasons.
was because of a lack of cash flow management, right? We'll call it, right? Not so much cash flow from the property, but cash flow management. So from all facets of the household budget, so they had to sell, or a good portion of people that had to sell because they were under duress. Had they had the nous, the education, whatever it may be, the support to be able to restructure their household budgets and control the cash flow and therefore keep the property, you fast forward to today and they're triple, probably more, quadruple in a lot of areas than what it was back then. Did we lose value off the asset? Yeah, potentially we did in some cases. Some cases it just changed the style of investing, and we actually did very, very well during the midst of the GFC. And I actually brackets, I think that'll be the case this time as well. If you bring that forward to today's scenario that we have, different trigger points, potentially same environment or same results somewhat.
Different price points.
Yeah, different price points. That the components that were in the GFC that weren't, or the trigger points of the GFC are vastly different from what we have today. We didn't have locked borders back then, so we had no immigration problems. Rates were a lot higher than what they are today. We didn't have wage growth back then, which is another massive point which people seem to be forgetting about in today's scenario where there is wage growth. And unemployment is the lowest it's been forever, just about. We have all these positive components that everybody seems to forget to talk about, as opposed to what was in the midst of the GFC. And I mentioned one of them, wage growth. Huge. Like, unemployment is so low now that if you want a job, there is one there for you. And don't crucify me on that, like, obviously within reason, yeah? But you can't get anything from someone making a coffee through to an accountant or an IT professional, and everything in between. You can't find the labour to do the job. Now, some might argue that, well, once the borders really do open and we get that mass immigration potentially, well, that will cool the labour market down somewhat, potentially, but we have a worldwide. This isn't Australia and its insular little island. This is a worldwide scenario where the labour force is very, very low in the developed countries across the world. So not only do we have our rents increasing, the individuals' wages are rising, and the finance ecosystem will be short, or the interest rate environment will be shorter than what it has been in the years that have gone past. Now, you mentioned about the serviceability metrics in the background, whether that be via an LVR position. Obviously, the rates are up, so that eradicates serviceability somewhat. And all the other little components in the back end of when you try to get a loan, which there are many. And we've said this quite a few times before. If you are in a position and your household budget is healthy, then while the bank is willing to give you money and you know that you can afford it, that being the key point, then you should consider. But spend wisely. So that doesn't mean on unproductive debt. It doesn't mean the Bentleys. It doesn't mean...
Hang on, you are the person that just bought a big car.
Yeah, but I've got to tow big people. It's so that unproductive debt. That's the key point. Also, as something else comes to my head, we're further ahead of our mortgages than we ever have been.
Absolutely.
Credit card debt is at its lowest since the 70s.
And that's pretty significant.
To me, that's actually one of the metrics to keep an eye on. Right, that'll show how much hurt there is to the consumer. If we start to see credit card debt just grow exponentially, then you know that there is stress within there. That'll take probably 6 to 12 months to see those figures, but let's also not forget that retail spending is almost at record levels as well. So there's still the confidence within society, I guess. Once again, job equals security. People have jobs. People are secure. It's the paper trade value of the asset that will be the big factor into what the broader community does, or
Absolutely.
the broader economy.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are blessed with is being able to talk to people of all walks of life as part of our role. And we are equally blessed to talk with people who have bigger portfolios than us and have also been investing for longer than us. And one of the questions we always ask is, what would you have done differently? Yeah. If you had your time all over again, every single person keeps saying, wish I had gone harder in the early days, and also wish I had gone harder when everyone else was taking a step back, because the fundamentals don't change, and property is all about holding the right assets over time. And sometimes you need to know which ones to rationalize, in other words, sell down to then replace that income stream, whether it's done its job or whether it's starting to become a problem property, or whether it's simply you're able to sell that down, free up more capital and borrowing power, and go into multiples yet again. Now, multiples does not mean multiple properties. It may mean multiple rental income streams as such. So all of these drills back to, if you look at and rely on the experience of people that have been around much longer, they all say, forget the cycles, invest for the medium to longer term. So you're not talking 18-month trenches or 2-year trenches. You're not trying to re-emulate the 2020 and 2021 market and try and get that sort of growth.
Not going to happen.
That's once in a lifetime. Yeah, and we're looking at it more from a cyclical point of view to say, okay, I want to hold the property for at least 2-3 cycles to get the best value out of it, understanding that the cycles are now actually compressing.
Correct. I want to question you on something, not challenge, question you on something though. So the growth period that we've had is, as you put, once in a lifetime, right? I guess for new investors, it is a once in a lifetime, but we've seen that. We've seen that before. I guess so. I just really answered or clarified the statement. There was super terrific growth after the GFC.
Yep. Every time there's a big crisis, there's huge growth. There's a catch up.
Correct. Prior to the GFC, so it was around 2000, 2003.
The recession we had to have.
Yeah, and I've said before, back in 2001, I think it was, or 2002, I had properties double in 12 months.
Yeah. Even if you go as far back as the Great Depression, right? Immediately after that, it went ballistic, right? Because it is a catch-up effect, and newfound energy, newfound confidence in the market gets people in droves into the market, and supply and demand comes in.
Kicks in. And we already have a supply and demand issue, as we've mentioned, which is a huge part of it, which is the accommodation piece, yeah? We've got the government incentives federally, both from the Liberal Party, the Coalition, and the Labor Party, saying this is what we'll do to encourage home ownership with their own sort of incentives. That will somewhat underpin the market as well as the rent, because if the banks are willing to give people because people have got a job and they're secure in it, and the government is also chipping in,
yeah, so
they're going to do it.
Absolutely.
But one of the big pieces that nobody seems to be talking about, and I might be wrong here, but I don't think I am, is foreign investment. Right now, obviously, I don't know how many years back, call it 4, 5 years or there ago, the Foreign Investment Review Board said, we're basically shutting the doors. We're going to impose, this is from a state and federal level, we're going to impose a raft of taxes to make it harder to invest in
property.
Yeah, within the country. So it'll be really interesting to see if those laws those tax laws start to retract somewhat, because the country and both governments have come out and said this: we need investment into the country like we've never had before.
Yep.
We need immigration into the country like we've never had before. It's like post-World War II sort of times. And it's all these little things that add up into a greater picture. So suddenly if you start to get big foreign investment back into the country, and the governments loosen the laws and therefore create the ability for foreign investment to come back into the country, that's a huge piece that underpins the economy And if you flow all the way back through, it underpins or goes towards another component of underpinning residential real estate.
Yeah, you see that with immigration, right? Before COVID, we were attractive to people that are migrating here. So it was a good country to be in, good systems, a good health system in itself, right? When you've got COVID and the way we handled COVID, it's made us super attractive to the immigrant. So we will see a big brain drain coming our way in terms of people of high caliber migrating here, which will then create more jobs, more investments, and so forth, right? But when you look at it from a viewpoint of, okay, what really adds value to the property sector? One would say that it's investment, but I would beg to differ. It's actually the owner-occupiers, because that's your larger component, right? So we as Australians have got per capita the highest amount of home ownership, and it's going to, it's not going to change anytime soon. So it'll basically add more to the value of the sector, particularly after COVID, where everyone wants their own piece of dirt, and home ownership with the government incentives and the plans that they've put together, both state and federal. That's certainly going to put things on the map. So we're not going to see a slowdown in the sector when you look at it from your medium to longer term trenches. Yes, there may be harder. It may be harder to actually get into property ownership, whether it is as an owner-occupier or an investor, given the ability to get finance, not necessarily from the bank willing to give you the loan, but more so because of the affordability, because of the assessment rates as the interest rates change.
So it'll almost be like Groundhog Day to somewhat, really, in regards to the intent will be there, but the ability in terms of finance may be reduced.
That's right.
Now, that goes back to the APRA handbrake days of 15, 16, 17 or thereabouts, where the intent was there, but the ability to borrow wasn't. And I believe that it'll be somewhat the same going into this cycle, which will only enhance the accommodation crisis piece, which on the back end, or on the back end of the rate cycle and on the beginning of the upward swing, will create potentially the same dynamic as what we've seen at the end of the other crises throughout our time.
Yeah.
So once again, 2000, 2003, 4, during and at the end of the GFC, at the end of the APRA handbrake letdown, and the growth that we've had because of COVID. And this could very much be history repeating itself. The major difference, and I kind of am repeating myself, but I believe it's so important that we are going into this environment in a far stronger position than we ever have as investors. Like, we just are there. You can't argue that fact. It's impossible.
Yeah. So as an investor, given that the market's changing from an interest rate point of view, should we hold and stay out of the market, or should we jump in feet first, or what should we do?
I think we answered that, and I don't know why we're still talking. Depends. Are we still recording? It's look, I think there are some people that should hold without fail. I think some people should sit on their hands and do nothing.
So who would those people be?
I think people that are already at the end of their affordability matrix.
Yeah.
And this is where I believe the sophisticated person steps up, because they will know. And how will they know? Because they're all around their household budget. They know where they are. Forget what the banks say. They know where they are. Or they might have major changes in their life. About to have triplets. Or plan on starting a family. Plan on changing jobs. Whatever it may be. With those major changes within their own unique situation, well then, why push it? Yeah. Control the position that you're in at the moment. There's always another time to re-enter. The people that I believe that should continue are those that know what they're trying to achieve, They know their own capacities, irrelevant from what the bank says. They know opportunity when they see it, and they go against the media grain.
Yeah, yeah.
I believe those people should. Now, we're the beneficiary of time in the market, you and I. We're the beneficiary of experience. And because we kind of know the outcomes, we know the ride, I guess, throughout these different scenarios and crises, whatever you want to call it, we're both buying.
Absolutely.
And I'm now just caveat to that. I'm not saying that or trying to sound like those property guys. We're not. We're just being brutally honest. What we're trying to do. The only thing I'm not doing, even though I want to, is constructing, because I can't get I nearly swore. Can't get a builder.
Yep.
It's and then the people that should sell are the people that know they're on the edge.
Yeah. Now, with constructing, I am constructing at the moment, and that's not because of choice. Well, a little bit of choice, but more so because my DA will lapse, or it actually may, in some of the properties that I'm constructing on, it just makes absolute sense to construct at the moment. But you need to have a long, hard look at whether you postpone your construction, go back into acquisition again, money pending, in terms of building up the foundations again, and then come back to the construction phase, in other words, your consolidation phase, once the builders are, and the supply of building material is a lot easier. And that may translate to, say, perhaps 2-3 years down the track. And when you really look at it, let's say you accumulate it today, and this is not me just saying, so you've got to buy a property. It needs to be individual basis and caveat on, what is going on with the rest of the factors that influence holding a property in your life. So if you accumulate it today, and you spent the money to get your DAs and all that through, if that's the plan that you've got, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months down the track, you could actually start your construction, and by the time, finance most likely will start to loosen up again, right? So it's a matter of planning it ahead and matching it to your financial fingerprint. That is something we do with our blueprints and with the reviews that we do with our portfolios for our clients. And there are many clients that you and I have both said, chill, sit on your hands, do not do anything. And there are others where we said, you got to offload one or two to free up some capacity, or show up the kitty in the sense, so that you can go through this phase, because there are changes happening with the business, their employment type, or their life. And there are others where we've turned around and said, we need to be more aggressive now because of two really simple things: opportunistic today, and you're actually running out of time, because there is an end point to this investing, because we have a finite borrowing and cyclical holding of properties, which is age related.
Correct. It's a good point. And it's, if you even sort of expand on who should and who shouldn't in and around finance, we've made the point that finance is going to become harder. However, as a side point, there are, thanks to COVID, or not thanks to COVID, but a large part of the silver lining of COVID somewhat is that there is, even if you look at our team, more women in the workforce because of flexibility, the ability to work from a blended environment or work from home, which adds to the household budget, once again, therefore potentially serviceability as time goes on as well. The lending, whilst I think it's going to become harder, I don't think it's going to be around the same result as what APRA did.
Nowhere near.
I can't see that happening, and maybe it will, but I just can't see it happening, because there's a bigger picture once again around the accommodation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People tend to forget just how big the industry is. It's not just about the property. It's about the total down the line industry that supports it during the construction, but after ownership. To state the obvious, clearly the builders, the white goods, the transport, the manufacturing, et cetera, it all adds up. And as we mentioned on a podcast or a Facebook Live a couple of months ago, where if you go back to the 50s, 50s, 60s, and Australia rode on the back of sheep, it was the wool industry. Today, it rides on the roof and tin tiles of residential real estate.
Absolutely.
Because it is so deep in terms of the economy. Everybody knows that. The government knows that. And they don't want to kill it. If they wanted to kill it, they wouldn't give the incentive in terms of ownership.
Yeah.
In and around the first time owner schemes, and from a federal level, but even from a state level. Like, people understand. Interestingly, though, just changing tact a little bit around listings and the ebbs and flows of consumer confidence, it amazes me how people are so reactive. I'll jump on the property bandwagon once I've seen everybody else's results.
Because they want tangibility, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or, well, geez, rates are going to go up, but I'm going to wait till they go up before I put my property on the market. Like, there's never that common sense sweet spot, collectively speaking. And the reason I say that is total property listings are up. Yeah, the knee-jerk reaction to the first interest rate rise.
Pretty much straight away.
Collectively over the whole of for the month, or for April, let's call it, it's up 4.8%.
And April is traditionally a slow month because you've got Easter, you've got school holidays.
Like 3-4 long weekends in a row, depending on where you are. You got Sydney up 5.8. You've got Adelaide up 4.3, Canberra 2.7, Hobart 17.7. But it all equals out at 4.8. However, the yearly change is still negative 12.8.
Yeah.
Right. So
let's not get caught up in the numbers that way, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, markets are around liquidity. And when we talk about liquid markets, it's what the volume is, what the turnover is. So, you could also drill down into that, to days on market. Now, yes, there'll be traditionally more properties on the market. Let's talk about Brisbane as an example, where you can't rent a property, as an example. But there's more stock on market. Now, that will be a collective approach from sellers taking the top of the market, which even you could put that across all states, saying, well, I'll put my property on the market now, it's done well, I'll take the money and run, which will be absorbed by investors and homeowners who are getting the incentives, because once again, there's nothing to rent. So when you look at it from that approach, will we see a softening of the market? No. Generally, what we'll see is a softening of the rate of growth.
Correct. Big difference.
Huge difference. Now, those investors that are used to and are reliant upon double-digit yearly annual growth over the last couple of years, you're in for a big surprise. That's not normality at all. You are just very lucky to be at a point in time to be the recipient of that. But it's not normal, and nor do you want it to be normal. You want a more lineal approach, dare I say it, even though that's not possible, than the big peaks and troughs.
Yep.
Because that wreaks havoc with mindset, confidence, and then the flow on throughout the whole economy once you get the collective, I guess, is the way to do it. So huge difference between negative growth versus softening growth.
Yeah. And we need to divorce ourselves from those headlines that are talking about negative growth. It is negative growth when you compare it to last year, but it's actually back to normalcy. It's still not normal. It's still bigger growth than normal right now.
In some places, absolutely. In some places, though, to be fair, though, there has been a drop. There are some parts of, say, the northern beaches of Sydney, where a couple of properties we were looking at have dropped $1 million off their asking price in the space of, let's call it 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, clarification around that, because I can see it being a headline in the, you can see it, like the news article, property's dropped $1 million on its asking price, overnight. The fact is, in that particular case, then the property was advertised for $6.2 million, and it's now down to 5.2.
It wasn't worth 6.2.
It was never worth 6.2. It was the vendor saying, you know what, the market is crazy, let's have a crack. If I get it, happy days, but we kind of know where it is. A couple of points to that. One, the agent doesn't like to waste time. But when they don't know what the market is in a frenzy, they can be a little bit advantageous and put it at a higher price. But the market will always speak.
Yeah. And particularly in those sort of markets, if it's on the market for too long, it loses its flavour very quickly.
Correct. Whereas conversely, you could go up to the sunny coast of Brisbane or even parts of the Gold Coast, almost the same price bracket, relatively speaking, still super buoyant. Right? It's different parts of the market are reacting quite differently. That will be dependent upon maybe the debt to income ratios, also the rate of growth that's been experienced over the last 1 to 3 years as well, because people aren't silly. They know when a market's cooked. And once again, the debt to income ratio, which is huge. Potentially that's why places like Perth will do very well, because they've got the best affordability out of the entire country. Jobs are obviously a very important scenario. Jobs are very good over there. They can't even find workers. And every particular state's got their own metrics. They've got their own buoyancy or liquidity within the market. And if you can drill down even further, not just from a state to a city to a suburb to a precinct to a region, everything is different. So be very careful when you're reading the media or trying to do your own diligence around general statements. You need to get granular to find out whether it's right for you.
Yep. We're almost out of time, Steve.
We are?
Yeah.
So what's the answer? I've given my answers, Vic. Should people keep, sell, or continue?
Depends. So if you've listened to this and you're thinking, geez, I still don't know what to do in my circumstances, reach out to us. Questions at rightpropertygroup.com.au, or you can go to our website and click on Contact Us. There's a contact form that you need to fill out. You will initially be talking with Melissa. Melissa's a very successful property investor who has got a fairly large property portfolio. So she will then prepare you for a meeting with either myself or Steve so that you can get the best of our time. And we can then use our years of experience to guide you as to what to do next. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a couple of properties under your belt, or you're just thinking of starting out and thinking, okay, should I or shouldn't I? Reach out to us and we can certainly guide you.
Yeah, once again, Mel's very experienced. She's been around a long time. She's been investing a long time. And so she's also seen the different
multiple
cycles as well. And she'll tell you how it is, from her opinion. And to reiterate what Vic said, then if you want, you'll then get to sit down in front of myself or Vic. But do yourself a favour. When you speak to Mel, make sure that you've got the correct information. Don't embellish your situation one way or another. Be absolutely truthful, so that when eventually you do get to speak to myself or Vic, we can give you an opinion based on fact around your scenario, as opposed to something being a little wishy-washy where everybody walks away from it and saying, well, what was that about? So truth is good.
And now we'll see you in the next fortnight.
It is. So we've got, once again, if you want to get in contact with us, we've got the contact forms, or you can get via the socials. We have our fortnightly Facebook Live sessions where, a little bit like our podcasts, we get a subject as we walk in the door and we
chew the fat.
We chew the fat. It's almost like a fireside chat. Maybe we should do that. In fact, we were speaking with, who was it? With Phil. And we think that'll be a really good recorded version, just especially now that we're in winter.
That's right.
A lot of fireplace. I reckon a bonfire. Get the cameras up. You can get your scotch out, and we'll just chew the fat. But on a serious note, once again, thank you for listening. It means a lot to us if you could give us a review too. There's a lot of people in behind the scenes that put this together, and it means a hell of a lot to both myself and Vic. So until then, next fortnight, Vic.
Goodbye.
We'll see you then.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.